Welcome back, folks. You're tuned into Infinite Podcast with your host, that's me, and my main man, Simon. Today we're diving into the Boston Tea Party. Crazy how a bunch of guys in disguise throwing tea off a ship became a huge historical moment, right? Tax laws had these colonists boiling over. Imagine paying taxes without a say in them. No taxation without representation. It was like lighting a fuse. Kind of reminds you of some modern protests, doesn't it? Simon, what's your take on that?
Oh man, the tea thing? Total madness. Picture it. You pay for your Netflix, but someone else picks what you watch. No way, right? Now they're all suited up like it's Halloween, chucking tea into the water like it's their cheating ex's phone. Today, people go nuts over a wrong coffee order. These guys went full-on costume drama over taxes. Everyone wants to feel heard, and the moment they don't, boom, tea's flying, signs are waving, tweets are tweeting. Rebellion's timeless, ain't it?
Absolutely, Simon. Reminds me of this time back in college. We were all required to buy this expensive textbook, mandatory for the course, they said. Halfway through the semester, not a page was assigned. So what did we do? Organized a little book return party, right at the dean's office. Our version of the tea party, minus the costumes and the harbor, though I wish we'd thought of that. It's about principle, man. If you say something's crucial, it better be, or people will push back. That's human nature.
No way, really? A book return party at the dean's office? Now that's a power move. Stick it to the man, Joe. When folks are pushed too far, watch out. Rebels with a cause come out swinging.
Yeah, the dean wasn't too pleased, but hey, it got the point across. Sometimes you gotta be a bit theatrical. Imagine if those Boston Tea Party guys had Twitter back then. The hashtags alone would sink ships. Tea overboard, dressed to spill, or Boston brouhaha.
Theatrical. More like social media meltdown. But hold on, Joe. Hashtags and memes aside, can we say a modern-day tweet storm really stacks up to tossing crates of the good stuff into the harbor? That was physical, in-your-face revolt. Now folks just vent into the digital void. Has that same fire really carried over? Our Boston boys bet their necks on those boats. Today's keyboard warriors might not even stand up from their desks.
I've got to disagree, Simon. Sure, back then you had to risk it all, or at least your lace-up boots, on the boats. But today's keyboard warriors, they're pushing for change from millions of fingertips. Real movements and protests have sparked from online outrage. Think Arab Spring, Me Too. These started as digital ripples but swelled into tidal waves of change in governments and societal norms. Never underestimate power in numbers, even when it's just ones and zeros.
Sure, digital movements pack a punch, yet to get that punch, things gotta bleed into the real world. Take the Arab Spring. It wasn't just tweets. People flooded the streets. And Me Too? It changed actual laws and lives because real faces spoke out beyond screens. Online starts it, but flesh and blood have to finish it. Digital's the spark. The streets are the bonfire.
Great points on the transition from online to on the ground, Simon. That sparks a question. Do you think our flesh and blood efforts have more staying power than those that stay digital? Is it the streets where history's really written?
Oh, absolutely. See, the digital stuff is like a match, flickers fast and catches eyes. But what really burns into history is when people step out and stand up, like in the Boston Tea Party. That was pure risk, no screens to hide behind, just guts and conviction. They dumped that tea, left a mark because they did something that couldn't be scrolled past. History's written by those moves, the ones you can touch and see, not just the ones you swipe through. Digital opens doors, my friend, but it's the stepping through them that carves out the story.
Well, history's written, sure, but let's not pretend like physical actions always hit the mark. The Boston Tea Party was a gamble, right? And today, what if that courage and conviction is there, but the impact fizzles out? Picture it. Some protest happens, makes a blip on the radar, then poof, gone without shifting the needle. It takes sustained action. You need both the digital match and the real-world fuel to keep that fire alive, or you're just left with smoke.
You're right about that lasting impact. Reminds me of my aunt's neighborhood, Joe. They were all upset over this gnarly pothole. Cars were getting mangled left and right. Everyone whined, but did zilch. One day, Aunt Patty had enough, started a roadblock with her book club. Imagine that sight. It was hilarious yet powerful. Local news came by, snapped pictures. That finally got the city to fix it. Sure, they didn't dump tea into the sea, but it goes to show, to make real waves, you can't just complain, you've got to stir the pot. In their case, literally around it.
No doubt about it, taking that stand can make all the difference, much like the roots of the Boston Tea Party itself. The colonists faced heavy taxation through the Sugar Act and the Townshend Acts, taxing everyday items, lead, paint, paper, and tea. It wasn't just about money, though. It was about Britain making decisions for the colonies without their input. Aunt Patty's pothole blockade and the colonists dumping tea both boiled down to civic engagement. Taxes without representation left many feeling powerless and sparked a collective action, similar to Aunt Patty rallying her book club to address local grievances. In both cases, direct action led to public attention, which ultimately forced those in power to reconsider and change course. The bottom line here is, whether through historical or neighborhood rebellion, change often starts with real boots-on-the-ground effort.
Oh, for sure. All those old-timey taxes were the straw that broke the camel's back. You ever get that sneaky fee on your phone bill for no reason? That rage you feel is like 1% of the colonists' Tea Party fury. They were done being the British piggy bank without having a seat at the table. Aunt Patty and her book club army got their street fixed by flipping some lawn chairs. Same energy, smaller scale. Civic engagement's where it's at. Whether it's a pothole or parliament, you gotta show up and shout out if you want things to budge.
Definitely. Getting heard is key, but let's flip it. What about the actions not taken? Take tax boycotting before the Boston Tea Party. It was peaceful yet impactful. Colonists simply refused to buy British goods until acts were repealed. This economic pressure was powerful too, not a single tea leaf tossed. Sometimes silence, or in this case absence of action, speaks volumes as well. Could be those pointed boycotts done right might just hit harder than the rowdiest protests. What do you think, Simon?
Absolutely. I mean, can you imagine getting the silent treatment from a whole continent? Britain must have felt like it texted, "I love you," and got left on read. Those boycotts were the ultimate talk-to-the-hand move, colonists hitting them where it hurts without lifting a finger. No muss, no fuss, just a big ol' economic cold shoulder. Now that's some steaming hot rebellion right there. Brewed just right, extra strong, hold the sugar and hold the tea too, I guess.
Haha, yeah, a whole continent ghosting you is a message that's hard to ignore. Britain probably didn't get the subtle hint until tea was bobbing in the harbor like apples at a fall festival. This silent economic rebellion laid the groundwork for the explosive action of the Tea Party. But what about the aftermath? How do these acts of defiance keep echoing today, shaping how we take a stand?
Speaking of aftermath, Joe, that Tea Party wasn't just a one-and-done kind of bash. After that shindig, things really escalated. Britain was like the angry neighbor who got their windows smashed by the party's baseball and came out swinging with these crazy rules called the Intolerable Acts. They really clamped down hard on Boston, shut down the harbor, tightened up government control. It's wild. This was supposed to punish Boston. It actually backfired, uniting the colonies like never before. Man, nothing says join together quite like everyone getting grounded by the same overbearing parent, huh?
Yeah, Britain essentially tried to force Boston into an apology by giving it a timeout that ended up uniting the playground against the principal. The Intolerable Acts pushed the colonies towards unity, but are we sure it was just those acts? Tightening the screws sparked conversation and collaboration, sure, but there's more to the story. It stoked a fire already burning. Maybe without these severe policies, we'd see a slower burn towards independence. Could this have been a misstep by Britain that inadvertently fast-tracked revolution?
Oh, 100%. Britain's equivalent of go to your room was the best worst move they could have made. Gave all the colonies a common enemy for the first time. Overshooting with those punishments was like dumping gasoline on the small barbecue. They turned it into a bonfire. These acts did more than just unite. They built a trampoline that bounced the colonies right towards revolution. Talk about an oops moment in history.
No way, they did that? Shut down a whole harbor? That's extreme. And you're saying it totally backfired on Britain? That's like using a hammer when you needed tweezers. No precision, just brute force. I can see how getting slapped with those kinds of restrictions would rally the troops. It wasn't just Boston in hot water, it became everyone's fight. Funny how trying to isolate one city could end up uniting an entire group of colonies. What a blunder.
Totally. Imagine slamming down the lid on a pot of boiling water, thinking that'll keep it calm. Instead, it spills over even more. Classic big move, leading to an even bigger mistake. Britain really stirred the pot on that one.
You've got a point about the overboil, Simon, but think of it this way. Maybe Britain miscalculated, but what if the intolerable acts had worked? If Boston buckled under pressure, would the other colonies have stepped up or stepped back? Britain was gambling, hoping fear would quell the rebellion. They went all in with their response, akin to doubling down in a high-stakes poker game. Thing is, they misread the room. They were playing checkers while the colonies were playing chess. It wasn't just about punishing one city, it was challenging an entire ideology.
Oh, you're spot on. It was a huge gamble, and Britain totally miscalculated. You know, those intolerable acts did more than just close the harbor. They took Massachusetts' self-government and judicial independence, basically saying you can't handle your own business. They even let British officials accused of crimes in the colonies stand trial back in Britain. Talk about a get-out-of-jail-free card. Plus, new quartering acts forced colonists to house British troops. So, it's no surprise that this inspired other colonies. They were thinking, who's next? It turned personal freedom into a communal fight real quick.
Absolutely. Britain's measures were basically a declaration that the colonies couldn't be trusted to self-regulate. It was like transforming Massachusetts into a child under strict supervision and pulling autonomy right from under them. This parental attitude didn't just unite the colonies, it inflamed them. Each act added insult to injury. The Administration of Justice Act seemed to openly protect corrupt officials, and the Quartering Act infringed on people's homes, forcing them to host soldiers. This wasn't just overreaching, it was flipping the colonial lifestyle on its head. These actions clearly drew a line in the sand, showing colonists exactly what they were fighting for, their way of life and basic liberties.
Exactly. Britain's moves were draconian, totally tone-deaf to the colonists' growing unrest and desire for respect. It was a slap to their face that echoed, "We don't trust you to pour your own tea."
Well, devil's advocate, some could argue Britain was well within its right to enforce the intolerable acts. After all, the Boston Tea Party was a significant loss of property, a whole shipment of tea gone. From their perspective, they needed to restore order and protect economic interests. These acts can be seen as an attempt to assert authority that had been flagrantly challenged. The colonies were, technically, under British rule, so you might say Brits were just laying down the law after a costly act of vandalism.
Oh, so if my neighbor's kid throws a baseball through my window, I get to take control of his treehouse and ground everyone on the street? Man, Britain was like that grumpy old guy down the block who takes everybody's frisbee if it lands in his yard. That'll teach him, he says. Except now all the kids have formed an alliance against him. Way to go, Britain. You just became the neighborhood's least favorite bingo buddy.
But let's not forget, those kids weren't just playing catch. They threw a rock through the window on purpose. It's easy to say Britain overreacted, but we're sitting here with the luxury of hindsight. For the British, it wasn't about being the grumpy neighbor. It was an attempt to enforce laws on what they saw as rebellious teenagers throwing a tantrum that shook their empire. What I'm getting at is maybe these intolerable acts were less about punishment and more about control, a desperate grip tightening as their authority slipped away. Did the British actually believe these acts would re-establish order, or was it simply a show of force to scare off any further rebellion?
All right, I feel you, Joe. It's easy to forget the fear on Britain's side. They were watching their empire get a bit rowdy. They might have truly believed these intolerable acts would snap everything back in line. Imagine you're walking your huge dog, this colossal Great Dane, and suddenly he starts pulling hard. Your gut reaction is to yank that leash back with all you got, not to punish him, but man, you're just trying not to face plant on the pavement. That's probably how the Brits felt, desperate to keep control before landing flat on their imperial backsides. It's a human moment, right? Fear can make you do some really bonkers things.
Absolutely, the fear of losing grip on their colonies must have been a driving force behind Britain's heavy-handed response. But even with that understanding, one has to wonder if there was any way they could have dialed it back, to respond without pushing all 13 colonies into each other's arms. It really begs the question, could there have been a different outcome with a more tempered approach, or were the seeds of independence already too deeply sown by then? What do you think, Simon?
You know, Joe, talking about the Boston Tea Party makes me think about what it would have been like on those ships. Imagine this. Two guys, let's call them Sam and John, dressed up as Mohawk Indians, whispering to each other in the dead of night surrounded by tea. Let's dive into that scene with our own satirical skit. What do you say we give life to Sam and John in Tea Talk on the High Seas?
So, Simon, Sam, and John are there among the crates, feathers in their hair, faces smeared with soot. What's going through their minds? Do you think they're serious about this whole tea debacle, or just thrilled to be a part of something bigger than a tax dispute?
I'm reminded of this one time, Joe, back in high school when our football team hadn't won a game all season. There we were, the underdogs, facing off against the top team. Everyone's hearts were pounding. We knew it was more than just a game. It was about proving ourselves. So there's Jimmy, putting on that mascot suit, big goofy bulldog head and all. I remember his grin as he shoved on that giant head. We weren't just aiming to win a game. It felt like we were kicking against every time someone told us, you can't. And when we actually won, man, it wasn't about the scoreboard anymore. It was pure David versus Goliath vibes. That same kind of bigger-than-us energy must have been surging through Sam and John with every crate of tea they tossed overboard.
Imagine Sam turning to John as they're about to chuck another crate and saying, "Mate, before we toss this tea, remember Jimmy the Bulldog? How winning that game felt like a revolution." And John's all, "Yeah, but Jimmy didn't have redcoats breathing down his neck." Just then, a voice pipes up from a nearby crate. Turns out it's an audience member calling in. "Hey, Sam and John, make sure you're not tossing any Earl Grey. That's my favorite. Save a pound or two for me." They're throwing tea into the harbor, aware each splash is both a statement and a possible one-way ticket to becoming Britain's most wanted. But hey, at least it wasn't their favorite flavor going overboard. It's those snippets of absurdity amid the gravity of rebellion that add spice to history.
All right, let's pull the anchor up on some facts while cruising through this skit. The Boston Tea Party wasn't just a bunch of guys randomly tossing tea. It was a huge statement against the Tea Act, which actually made British tea cheaper than smuggled tea. Seems good, right? But here's the catch. It reaffirmed Britain's right to tax the colonists without giving them a say. So Sam and John, our rebellious Mohawks, they're not just ditching tea for kicks, they're dunking on parliamentary overreach. Each crate bobbing in the harbor was like a snarky post in an 18th century Twitter feed against taxation tyranny. And about saving that Earl Grey, which didn't exist yet, by the way. Earl Grey tea came around in the 1820s, shows the quirky side of protest. They weren't just sending a political message, they were changing the entire menu for tea time in America.
Honestly, Sam and John probably could have used Twitter to tag every tea crate with cheeky hashtags like #SplashTheTax or Boston Brew Party. Each splash was a trending topic, a meme in the making. It's not just politics. They turned rebellion into an 18th century viral event.
Oh, for sure, Joe. If Sam and John had hashtags back then, tea gone overboard would have been all the rage. Let's not gloss over why this midnight tea ditch was a big deal. It was smack in the middle of the transatlantic info superhighway. Boston Harbor was like the Twitter feed of the colonies, a hotspot where news spread fast and furiously, and those cheeky colonists knew it. Tossing that tea into the harbor, they made every splash a subtweet at Britain's expense. They weren't just throwing away leaves, they were crafting the ultimate clapback to the whole empire. So imagine each crate of tea with its own hashtag floating away. This tea party is steeped in protest, or don't tread on my tea bags. That'd get the colonial thumbs double tapping for sure.
I can just see those meme-worthy hashtags making ripples beyond Boston. The next day would have been wild with gossip, speculation, and if there was a colonial version of a retweet, imagine every tavern spreading the word from Portsmouth to Savannah. Tea gone overboard might have been the start, but think about what came after, the stories, the myths. So Simon, I wonder how that single act shaped the American identity as much as it resisted taxation. What do you reckon those first post-Tea Party headlines would have read?
Man, Joe, we probably would have seen headlines like Bostonians spill the tea on taxation, with chapters of history books spinning off from there. But speaking of making a splash, isn't it wild how even today, the spirit of the Boston Tea Party lives on? You've got tax protest groups and activists channeling that same no taxation without representation fire in their bellies right into modern-day movements. It's like every act of financial dissent is sipping from the same historical teacup.
Absolutely. But here's where I'll push back a bit. Financial dissent today walks a fine line between taking inspired action and merely causing disruption for its own sake. When groups use the Tea Party's playbook, they have to remember context is key. Back then, it was taxation without any room for input, literally no mechanism to influence policy. Today's governance, flawed as it is, does offer channels for change that didn't exist in colonial times. And about repeating history, well, modern tech puts government laps ahead of most would-be usurpers, making a movement like the original Tea Party harder to pull off. So let's pump the brakes on the idea that tax protests can just mimic 1773. How smart is it really in our complex economy to think that the same stunts will work or even be considered valid? What's your stance on this, Simon?
Wait, hold up, Joe. Are you saying some folks today are trying to slam dunk like the 1773 crew, but with tax policy? Wild. But yeah, I get what you're saying. Throwing tea into a harbor is one thing when you literally have no seat at the table. It's another ball game now when we've got ways to vote and all these fancy channels for making our voices heard. And let's be real here. Storming into modern problems like it's still the age of wearing powdered wigs isn't just old school. It's missing the point. Our systems are crazy complex, and just shaking fists or tossing tea isn't going to magic that complexity away. I mean, come on, context matters. Plus, even if seeking liberty is timeless, how we go about fighting the good fight has got to evolve, right? So when people suit up in their revolutionary best, they better not forget we're playing in a whole different league nowadays.
Hold up, modern groups using old-time rebel tactics for financial dissent? Now that's a twist. Taking a page out of the 1773 playbook feels a bit theatrical in today's high-tech world. It's one thing to make some noise, but totally another when there's a framework in place for change. Sure, chopping at the roots of unfair policies is classic liberty-seeking stuff, but times have changed. We've got more tools and ways to engage beyond just protest. Acting like we're stuck in colonial times ignores all the new avenues we've got for making a difference. So folks waving that old Tea Party spirit around gotta remember, accountability comes not just from refusing to pay taxes, but also from being an informed contributor in our democracy. Let's swap those crates of tea with educated votes, policy proposals, and community action. What do you think about bringing back that spirit in ways that fit the 21st century, Simon?
Throwing tea overboard is straight-up movie material, but now we have the whole internet to make waves. I mean, can you imagine if Sam and John had a hashtag? Boston Harbor Cleanup Challenge wouldn't stand a chance. Let's bring that rebel energy into something fresh, like hackathons for social change. Now that's what I call a modern-day tea party.
Totally, a modern-day revolt doesn't necessarily mean taking to the streets. It means coding new paths to liberty. Hackathons for social change are winning today's battles. 1,000 lines of code might be more disruptive and constructive than any harbor hijinks. And let's not forget, while hashtags can rally troops faster than Paul Revere ever did, they also bring global scrutiny in an instant. Movements now must be sharper, backed by crystal clear purpose, because everyone's watching. Sure, stir up the pot with that same Boston spirit, but if you're going to capture hearts and minds today, it better stand the digital age's intense spotlight test. Simon, how do we balance keeping that revolutionary spark alive without just sparking chaos?
Joe, this reminds me of my grandma's legendary soup strategy. Stick with me here. When I was a kid, she always had the same rule for her kitchen protests when prices shot up at the grocery store. Use what you've got and make it work harder for you. She'd whip out leftovers, garden herbs, whatever was on hand, and cook up something new instead of tossing things out or letting them sit there unused. Our modern toolbox is like Granny's spice rack, packed to the brim with resources that go beyond just marching or boycotting. She knew one ingredient could change the whole flavor. Same goes for us using technology, social platforms, and community networks to cook up change. It's about finding the right combination to get that hearty taste of progress without burning down the kitchen. Now, that's a recipe worth sharing.
Absolutely, we can't just throw all our ingredients into the pot and hope for the best. Perseverance without precision is a fast track to a kitchen disaster, or in our analogy, social upheaval with no clear endgame. It's about strategy, using those resources selectively. And while I love the idea of grassroots movements cooking up change, there's also a risk, like that kitchen fire you don't see coming because you're too focused on that perfect seasoning mix. We've got to keep a keen eye on the whole kitchen, recognizing when to turn up the heat and when maybe, hey, it's time to let things simmer down and integrate voices from across the aisle. The question is, can today's activists tap into that fiery spirit of defiance without scorching their credibility? Or better yet, how do they ensure their call to action doesn't go from Granny's soup of the day to an unappetizing flash in the pan?
Granny's soups aside, remember when pet rocks were a thing? Yeah, somehow people got fired up over literal stones. If that sort of hype can happen, let alone spread, just think about the possibilities if we pour that energy into social movements with actual substance today, not just flash-in-the-pan protests. Now that's what I call mixing up something spicy.
Definitely, pet rocks show us hype can be powerful. Harnessing that energy for substantial causes can indeed shake things up. It's always fascinating what captures public attention. Imagine channeling that into advocacy or reform. Makes you wonder, what will be the next pet rock of social movements? Something seemingly small and absurd that could actually rock the foundation of economic or policy change. Simon, what unconventional protest might just catch fire next in our quest for a modern legacy of liberty?
You know, speaking of rocks and brewing up a storm, it kind of feels like beer has always been the social glue that cements communities together. It's wild how just as ancient movements brought folks around campfires, today's craft brews reel in crowds at local joints. So here's something to chew on, or sip, I guess. Beer's been at the epicenter of human gatherings from way back when Sumerians were pulling pints in Mesopotamia to our modern-day hops obsession. What's your take on this bubbly slice of history, Joe?
Absolutely. Beer has been a cornerstone of social interaction for eons. Think about the significance of those ancient Sumerian brews. They were downing a version of beer some 5,000 years ago. Talk about a long-standing tradition. And how fascinating is it that what started out as communal bread fermentation has poured itself into today's craft beer craze? Curious though, Simon, in your view, how did the shift from those age-old brewing methods to today's sophisticated techniques really alter the fabric of beer culture? Did it create a rift or revitalize traditions in the communities built around this frothy beverage?
Well, Joe, I reckon it's a bit of both. Back in the old days, brewing was like a community potluck, everyone throwing in what they had on hand. Fast forward to today's precise methods with scientific tweaks and unique ingredients. It's more like everyone bringing their own secret dishes to the table. But here's the kicker. Even with all the fancy gear and exotic flavors we've got now, the essence is still about sharing stories, clinking glasses, and feeling that sense of belonging. Whether it was a Sumerian swigging down some barley pop or your buddy at the local taproom raving about his latest IPA, the heart of beer culture, it keeps beating strong. It just got more layers, like an onion you'd rather drink than cry over.
But here's the counterpoint, Simon. Not everyone sees modern brewing as a simple evolution or enhancement. Some argue we've lost the authenticity of ancient beer, its raw connection to nature and communal roots. Mass production, some say, has diluted the cultural significance that each unique local brew carried. And there's weight to that. Ancient beers were deeply entwined with local agriculture, available resources, and regional tastes, often reinforcing community identity and self-sufficiency. These days, with global distribution networks, you can get any beer anywhere. It's convenient, yes, but potentially at the expense of local character and economy. Sure, this conversation has layers, like any good historical brew, but it's worth questioning if progress in brewing has also meant sacrificing a pint of tradition along the way.
Hold up, though, Joe. I'm all for tipping my hat to the ancients, but let's not romanticize them too much. Those beers were more necessity than craft. Dirty water was a no-go, so beer was basically medieval Brita filters with a buzz. Plus, they weren't exactly savoring flavor profiles. It was drink, don't get sick, rinse and repeat. The game changer? Skill and science. Modern brewers are like alchemists, taking traditions and turning them into gold with each pint. Sure, we might lose a bit of that fermented by the light of the full moon vibe, but what we're gaining is consistency, quality, and an ever-expanding menu of tastes that ancient folks couldn't even dream about. And about local character, it's actually booming. Small breweries are everywhere, tossing in local flair like they're sprinkling magic brewing dust, crafting identities in a can. It's diversity in a glass, Joe. Cheers to that, I'd say.
True, but let's not forget the wild card of craft beer revolutions, home brewing. It's taking us full circle back to those ancient roots, people experimenting in their own kitchens, sharing concoctions with neighbors. It's history repeating in the coolest way, with pint-sized personal touches that big breweries can't match. Home brewers could be brewing up the next beer craze without even knowing it. What's the next homegrown hop bomb that'll explode onto the scene, you think?
Joe, tapping into that homebrewing hobbyist heart is drilling down to where the magic all started. It's not just about following a recipe, it's about their flair, the trial and error, the local ingredients they can play with. That's the secret sauce, the personal touch. Think of each garage brewer as a mad scientist or an artist, blending history with innovation. And about what's next? The beauty lies in unpredictability. One backyard batch could resurrect forgotten grains or infuse experimental new hops, sparking a trend that ripples through the whole brewing pond. Whether it reimagines an ancient style or bubbles up something entirely new, the grassroots beer buff's enthusiasm might just be the yeast that keeps the culture alive and fermenting strong. Keep an eye on those neighborhood brew fests. They're often where tomorrow's classics are taking root.
That personal touch has some serious implications. It's all about terroir too, the environment where the brew's ingredients come from. Just like with wine. Ancient brews were a direct reflection of the land around them, limited but distinctive. Today's homebrewers are doing something similar yet novel, combining local ingredients with global techniques they've learned from the craft movement. Just think, ancient brewers had to work with what grew nearby, but modern homebrewers can order exotic ingredients from across the planet while still using hops or barley grown in their backyard. They're bridging worlds, respecting the roots while pushing boundaries. These microcosmic brewing experiments could lead to hybrid styles, influencing larger-scale production and even economic growth within local communities. Keep it local, go global. That's quite the mantra for the beer revolution. Past, present, and future.
Yeah, Joe, that mantra nails it. Think about how the terroir-driven approach of past and present is like having a little bit of home in every sip. We're seeing this massive trend of brewers valuing local ingredients, which belies a larger movement towards sustainability and community support. Each grain and hop has its own story, like heirloom varieties getting new life or wild yeasts captured right in someone's backyard, leading to funky, earthy profiles you can't replicate in a lab. These practices nod to our ancestors while feeding today's hunger for authentic, eco-conscious drinks. It circles back to beer being the liquid thread weaving through human culture. It tethers us to the past, but also to our current lands and values. Homebrewers and craft aficionados are sowing these seeds on the micro level, sure, but as more folks taste their inventive brews, demand grows, even inspiring big-time producers to rethink what they plant and pour. Ain't that something? Beer, the timeless tale of people and their patches of earth. Cheers to that heritage continuity, with a twist.
Here's a thought. Let's raise our next glass to those unsung heroes, the yeast. These tiny agents are what truly link ancient ales to today's IPAs. They're the unsung architects behind each brew's soul, quietly crafting the character of our cherished drinks for millennia. Now that's fascinating.
For sure, Joe, yeast is the unsung rock star, tiny but mighty. These little critters have been the brewmaster's secret handshake since the dawn of frothy drinks. They're like the invisible conductors orchestrating the symphony in our steins, transforming humble sugars into complex flavors that tell a story with each gulp. So here's to yeast. May it continue to ferment fascination and flavor for ages to come. Who knows what brewing tales are yet to be told because of these microscopic marvels. Cheers to that.
Simon, talking about yeast and the global spread of beer culture kind of makes me think about another beverage that's had a massive impact on the world stage: tea. It directly connects to geopolitics and has shaped empires, from the way it stirred up Britain's colonial march to that pivotal moment in history at the Boston Tea Party, where throwing tea overboard became an unspoken declaration of independence. It's wild how deeply these drinks are steeped in our world history, isn't it?
Well, hold on a second, Joe. Not everyone might agree tea had that much clout in the grand scheme of empires. Sure, it was a big deal for Britain and its colonial reach, and yep, the Boston Tea Party was a major political statement. But let's not forget other factors like military power, industrial advancements, and pure old-fashioned politics in shaping empires. Tea played its part within a vast web of trade commodities, like spices, silk, or sugar, that also held serious weight in global economics and power dynamics. To pin empire shaping primarily on tea, that might be oversteeping the importance of one little leaf. The lesson herein? A cuppa holds more than just liquid. It's filled with complex history too, but to varying degrees depending on who you ask.
Look at it this way, though. Tea may not be the lone player, but think about its ripple effect in British colonial policy. It wasn't just a commodity. It was the catalyst for Britain's expansion into China and India, reshaping the geopolitical landscape. The Opium Wars, for instance. They were fundamentally about maintaining the flow of tea to Britain. And then you've got the Boston Tea Party. It wasn't just about taxation. It signified the breaking point of colonial patience, lighting the fuse for the American Revolution. So while tea was one of many factors, it certainly brewed up some major historical moments with far-reaching consequences that we're still feeling today.
All right, let's steep a bit deeper in that tea talk. The influence of the leaf goes beyond just skirmishes and revolutions. It's about serving hot economic power in geopolitical teapots. Take Britain industrializing Indian production to bypass Chinese monopoly. This didn't just pour tea into British cups, but also reshaped local economies, social structures, and even land use in colonies. Moreover, the Boston Tea Party's throwdown was loaded with symbolic defiance, leveraging tea as the emblem of imperial overreach, which brewed into broader policy shifts and national identity formation. Drinking preferences across the pond shifted too. Americans seeking alternatives paved the way for coffee's surge in popularity. So there's more to the story, with layers of economic, social, and cultural impact lingering like a strong brew in a cup that's been affecting policies and national identities for centuries now. Ain't history fascinating? It's not just how we view beverages, but how those beverages viewed and altered the world stage.
Circling back, isn't it intriguing that we're discussing the historic cloud of beverages while casually sipping them? It's a reminder that every cup we raise toasts to a legacy of empires, economics, and revolutions. Casual sips overlaying a backdrop of world-changing events. Next time we take a gulp, maybe we should wonder what stories are swirling around in our mugs.
Funny story, Joe. You know my Aunt Mabel, right? She's got this ancient teapot, ornate thing, probably looted from a pirate ship knowing her. Anyway, she swears by its brews like they're magic potions. For every family gathering, out comes the pot, everyone gawking at it as she recites where each ingredient is picked: Darjeeling leaves, Moroccan mint, you name it. She says the tradition of sharing various teas keeps our family history alive, reminds us where we came from, sort of binds us together. Now, whenever I see that old pot, it's more than just tea time. It's like a mini globe on our table, a mix of lands and tales, all connecting us in ways deeper than DNA. Makes me think those tiny leaves do more than flavor water. They're quiet witnesses to our histories, uniting and dividing us. And as Aunt Mabel pours another cup, it's a little nod to how something so simple soaked up centuries of human drama.
What if that teapot could talk, Simon? Imagine the murky waters of history it'd clear up over a cuppa. Maybe our world's fate hung in the balance over tea leaves more often than we think.
Well, Joe, while it's tempting to romanticize tea as the tipping point in world events, let's not get carried away. If that teapot could talk, I bet it would say, "Keep me out of this mess." It might argue that geopolitical shifts are never about just one product or event. Trade networks, wars, alliances, these vast, complex forces shape history. Take the Industrial Revolution. Innovations in technology and manufacturing had a profound impact on global power structures, arguably more so than any beverage. And consider political philosophy. The Enlightenment ideas were brewing revolutions well beyond the teapot's reach. So if we're being honest, while tea played its part, especially culturally and economically, it danced alongside many other heavy hitters on the geopolitical stage. The fate of nations? That's always been more about people, power, and progress than what's steeping in our cups.
Sure, the Industrial Revolution and political philosophy were heavyweight champions in the ring of history. But let's not count tea out just yet. Take the British East India Company. It built an empire on the back of those leaves, becoming essentially a state within a state. Yeah, tea danced among other influences, but it didn't just waltz. It tangoed with raw power and colonial might. And how about tea as a symbol of colonial resistance? Look at Gandhi's Salt March, a direct echo of the Boston Tea Party in its mix of simplicity and profound symbolism. That parallel alone shows that the power woven into tea transcends continents and centuries. It seems the humble leaf is less of a side character and more of a key player on stage, crafting scenes and influencing the main acts. Tea may not be calling all the shots, but surely it's been both a shield and a sword in the art of empires.
That's some solid historical brew, Joe. Considering those points, how do you reckon the view of tea might still be influencing our modern alliances and disputes? Could these ancient trade dynamics be steeping beneath today's geopolitical strategies?
Well, modern alliances and disputes are less about tea itself, Simon, and more about what it represents: economic interdependence and the leverage that comes with it. Today's tea could be tech, oil, or even data. New commodities define current geopolitical tensions. Global supply chains might have shifted in content, but not concept. Control the bottleneck, and you steer the ship of power. Sure, you don't see world leaders fighting over Darjeeling estates now, yet they're locking horns over semiconductor factories and rare earth minerals. The chessboard's the same, just the pieces have changed. So while Aunt Mabel's teapot isn't dictating policy directly, the legacy of tea trade's impact on global dynamics, that's another story. It carved a blueprint for economic diplomacy and resource control tactics we still witness and grapple with today. Tea leaves may crumble, but their shadows loom large in our 21st century geopolitical narrative.
You're hitting the mark there, Joe. It's like each commodity tells a chapter of our ongoing economic saga, tea just being one of those early plot twists. And now, as we grapple with this transition from tangible resources like tea to the intangible ones like data, it seems our thirst for control in this global narrative hasn't waned a bit. Makes you wonder, what will be the tea of tomorrow, and how will it shape the geopolitical landscape? That's something to ponder over the next brew, isn't it?
Speaking of beverages shaping history, let's uncork some amusing tales from wine's past. You think tea has stories? Wine's been fermenting some crazy history for millennia.
Oh man, Joe, reminds me of that time I tried to impress a date with my so-called wine knowledge. There I was, yapping about the perfect wine pairings, talking out of my hat, really. Her dad owned a vineyard, and just as I'm spouting nonsense about the subtle notes of some bargain bottle, he steps in. With a straight face, this guy tells us about the ancient Greeks using a wine called vinum insaniae. Yeah, wine of madness. Claimed they'd drink it only when making big decisions because they believed you could only reach true honesty when you're one cork away from Looneyville. So while I'm trying to look sophisticated, swirling my glass, they're in stitches watching me buy the story. Turns out it was all grapes and giggles. He made it up to poke fun at my pompous act. But hey, it broke the ice, and we ended the night laughing so hard we cried. Learn 2 lessons. First, don't talk wine with an expert unless you know your Merlot from your elbow. And second, historical wine tales? They can turn arrogance into a party real quick.
No way, wine of madness? That's gold. Ancient Greeks knew how to party. Those old-school vintners were all about mixing wine with a bit of mischief. Your date's dad had a sense of humor fermented to perfection. Now I've got to wonder what other wild wine tales are hidden in the cellars of history. Cheers to the grapevine of giggles where the truth is sometimes bottled up in jest.
Absolutely, Joe. There's a whole barrel of bizarre vino vignettes out there, like that time Thomas Jefferson racked up a wine tab so massive it could have bankrolled an entire vineyard. Wine tales never seem to run dry, do they?
Jefferson's wine bill, huh? Classic mix of high office and even higher tab. Could have aged a few French debts with that one. Goes to show, leaders and their cellar ledgers have been at odds for centuries.
Right? Jefferson was the poster child for lofty wine tastes on a government salary. But how's this for vintage gossip? It said Napoleon had a quarantine stash of his favorite Burgundy for his exile to Elba. Guess he figured if you can't have the empire, at least secure the cellar. And talk about quirky wine laws. Medieval Germany took their wine so seriously, they created a wine law, Heidschnucke, where a sheep was sent into the vineyard first. If it didn't drop dead, the wine was declared safe to drink. Talk about the original quality control. Cheers to those times when history is more tipsy than textbook.
Napoleon's Burgundy stash is less gossip, more strategy, comfort in a bottle while in isolation. Wine's allure often transcends circumstance. From palaces to exile, some things just can't be left behind. And that bizarre medieval German law, a slice of the stringent purity standards embedded in Germans' winemaking ethos, all leading up to the famed 1516 Reinheitsgebot, the beer purity law. Still no definitive proof if sheep were official vineyard testers, but it's a time-capsuled nod to the lengths they'd go to ensure quality in a pre-scientific era. History has shown us wine isn't just about inebriation. It's been about orientation, a compass pointing to cultural norms, legal oddities, and the very human desire to safeguard what's poured into our goblets. From emperors to common shepherds, everyone wanted their wine free from foul play, proving yet again how deep in the barrel of humanity's priorities fine wine has been stored.
You're onto something with the cultural compass, Joe. But think about it. Wine didn't just reflect norms, it was an agent of chaos at times, too. Like take the great French wine blight in the 19th century. Grapevines were dropping like flies. You'd think it was the end of vino as we knew it. Those pesky the French had to swallow their pride and use American rootstocks just to save face and grapes. And let's not start on those wild Roman parties. Caligula, that wacky emperor, he took Dionysus seriously. Guy loved his wine so much, he'd appoint his favorite horse as a priest to ensure divine blessings on his vineyards. They wanted divinity in every pore, but I bet the wine still hit gritty Roman roads more than heavenly gates. From pests playing the Grim Reaper to horses turned holy sommeliers, wine history is as rich and unpredictable as a blind wine tasting. Shows that behind every vintage label, there's a pretty ripe story soaked in.
Bet Caligula's horse had the best nose for a fine vintage. Could have sparked equine wine critics, if only those hooves could handle a pen.
Speaking of horses and their hypothetical wine critiques, it's fascinating how animals were once considered part of the divine decision-making, right? And you know what also helped decision-making, especially for the big guns in history? A good old cup of coffee. It really kicked into gear during the Enlightenment. Java was basically jet fuel for the mind.
Absolutely, Simon. Enlightenment-era coffeehouses were the epicenters for debate and thought clash. Java-powered symposiums without the togas. Charged with caffeine, philosophers, writers, and revolutionaries hashed out ideas that laid the groundwork for modern democracies. They didn't just serve coffee, they served up a brewing storm of intellectual rigor. Voltaire reportedly downed 50 cups a day, quite the contrast to the alcohol-induced haziness of tavern locales. These coffee salons spurred a caffeinated sharpness in discourse, trading intoxication for stimulation, arguably fueling revolutions both political and industrial. Today's cafe scene? It's the direct descendant, innovation and networking over lattes and Wi-Fi signals.
I'm not totally sold, Joe. Sure, coffee houses sparked lots of chat, but come on, did caffeine alone hatch democracy and reason? It's a stretch, like saying espresso shots invented the internet. Coffee was just part of the menu. Ideas were cooking long before coffee was the trendy sip. Take the Wi-Fi drenched cafes now, more Instagram scrolls than world-changing scrolls. Back then, you drop Voltaire in a modern cafe. He'd be penning critiques on latte art instead of championing liberty. We romanticize those days as though every sip led to a breakthrough, but I bet a bunch of those folks just loved the buzz, both from the gossip and the grind. Refreshing as it is to think of coffee as this potion of progress, the Enlightenment's heavy lifting, that wasn't done by beans alone. The ideas were already percolating. Coffee just kept them awake longer to argue about it.
For those who just tuned in, we're buzzing over the simple bean that fueled an era, coffee. During the Enlightenment, coffee houses became hotspots for high-voltage intellectual exchange. We've been batting around whether coffee can claim credit for birthing modern thought. While it certainly didn't invent conversation, caffeinated arguments and idea brews flowed more freely than ever. It kept thinkers like Voltaire sharp, not shrouded in drunken fog, but it wasn't some magic elixir of genius. So what's the takeaway? Coffee didn't cook up reason or revolutions on its own. The ideas were already simmering. Coffee houses just provided a social stove for them to boil over. And today, well, our cafes might feel more selfie than scholarly, but they're flavored by that same centuries-old tradition, a place where conversations, and maybe the next big thing, are brewing.
But think about it. How many revolutions these days are born from a bold brew and free Wi-Fi? The next big movement might just be simmering in someone's cup right now.
You know, this reminds me of the young tech entrepreneur I met at a local coffee shop. Let's call him Mike. There he was, hunched over his laptop, eyes locked on the screen, nursing what must have been his fourth Americano. Curiosity got the better of me, and we struck up a conversation. Turns out he's developing an app aimed at streamlining global aid distribution, a potential game changer for disaster relief efforts. In that bustling cafe, amidst the clatter of cups and chatter, you could feel ideas radiating from him like the warmth of freshly brewed coffee. It's these modern-day coffee houses, echoing their Enlightenment ancestors, providing a platform where today's thinkers are forging tomorrow's innovations. Who knows? Maybe the next major social shift is brewing in the mind of someone sipping a latte next to you. Coffee, coupled with connection, it's still making waves, one sip at a time.
You make a strong case, Joe, with Mike and his app. Sure, current-day coffee shops have their moments, but let's not put them on a pedestal just yet. The place might brim with MacBooks rather than manuscripts, but most are brewing social media side hustles more than the next big societal leap. Now, what I think is really shaking things up: craft cocktail culture. It's like every mixologist out there is a chemist, botanist, and artist wrapped into one, crafting drinks that buzz with creativity. They're stirring up more than just spirits. They're blending a concoctive community. It's hip, it's happening, and it's got history in its veins. A throwback to those Prohibition days when speakeasies were the hidden hubs of hush-hush happenings. These trendy taverns take us back while pushing boundaries. Sure, they might not be solving world hunger, but they sure are inventing some world-class hangovers.
Craft cocktails are stirring the pot, literally and socially. They're a liquid canvas where innovation meets tradition, giving us a sip of past cunning with a modern twist. Deep chats might still linger over coffee cups, but it's clear mixology is shaking things up. And remember, whether it's Enlightenment thinkers or modern-day shakers, great ideas often come from places where people gather to let their guard down and their imaginations run wild. Be it over coffee or cocktails, conversations flow, ideas ferment, and sometimes they change the world, one round at a time. So what'll be next? A revolution in a cup or a cause in a cocktail? Let's keep the conversation brewing.
Cocktails are like a taste-testing time machine. The mixology's just our generation suiting up for a flavor adventure. It's not just about novelty, it's experience in a glass. Now, with social media, if your drink doesn't shimmer on Instagram, did you even enjoy it? The real buzz isn't from the booze, it's those likes and shares.
Mixology's rise isn't just chasing the new, it's our appetite for the exceptional. Each crafted cocktail is a symphony of flavor. It tells a story, delivers an experience that transcends your standard drink. Bartenders morph into storytellers and artists. Social media, meanwhile, amplifies this crave for the exquisite. Eye-catching garnishes, unique glassware. Instagram prioritizes the visual feast. It's not enough to just taste great. Cocktails must perform on the digital stage. Mixologists are leveraging this by creating Instagrammable moments, dazzling colors, interactive elements, and presentation theatrics such as smoke and fire. It's the era where drinking culture meets pop art. Visually captivating concoctions become shareable cultural currency in today's connected world. Cheers to that.
Cheers. But here's my beef, Joe. Aren't these cocktail circuses distracting from what matters, how the thing actually tastes? I went to this place where they had a drink with more garnish than glass. Looked like a mini jungle. Did it taste good? Honestly, couldn't tell you. My taste buds were as confused as a cat at a dog show. Social media is only upping that ante. People browse for the next viral sip, not necessarily the next top-shelf mix. If Hemingway saw his beloved daiquiri turned into a glow-in-the-dark spectacle, he'd stir in his grave. We've traded savor for swagger, depth for dazzle. And another thing, we laud these flamboyant photogenic potions. But isn't this just liquid materialism? The cocktail's meant to loosen lips, spark spontaneity, not prompt a photo shoot. It's social lubrication turning into social performance. You ask me, folks should focus on the converse and clink over the click and post.
You hit a nerve here, Simon. I get it, truly. We seem to be valuing style over substance, the craft of mixology getting lost in the spectacle. When that mini jungle on your glass takes the spotlight, it's as if we're nibbling at garnish and forgetting to savor the main course. I've been there, staring down a drink so dolled up for a snapshot it'd make a peacock roll its eyes. Makes you wonder what we're losing when the show overshadows the essence, when the flavor gets muddled by the fanfare. We're thirsting for likes as much as libations, turning what should be an authentic experience into another item on the social media conveyor belt. That's not just disappointing, it's disheartening. We ought to sip and savor these concoctions for their artistry, not merely their aesthetics. Life and drinks are meant to be tasted, digested, not just documented.
Maybe we need a cocktail blackout, Joe. No posts allowed. Just good vibes and better company, savoring the sip instead of staging the shot.
Might that be the next big thing, Simon? A digital detox bar where it's just about the drink and the dialogue. No cameras, no social proof, just pure imbibing pleasure and human connection. Could that catch on, you think?
A digital detox bar, Joe? Hard pass from me. People love their screens as much as a stiff drink. Picture this, a room full of folks awkwardly fumbling with conversation because they can't break the ice with, "Hey, let me show you this funny meme." You risk turning happy hour into awkward hour. Bars were onto something before smartphones hijacked our attention. But a tech ban won't bring back those glory days of chatter. It'll just remind people what they're missing out on. A second where Aunt Sally's cat video could have saved us from a lull in the convo. Here's a wild pitch. What if bars embraced the tech and mixed it up? Interactive coasters where your drink likes predict the next round. Bartenders who craft your social media presence alongside your beverage. Now that's blending mixology with modern times. Just don't forget to charge your phone.
So remember that bar crawling adventure last summer in New York? Landed at this speakeasy with old world charm, leather-bound menus, you name it. Orders go around, I'm feeling adventurous. Pick this smoky whiskey concoction with a techie twist. A QR code coaster comes with it. Here's the kicker. You scan it, and suddenly there's a mini profile of the drink on your phone. Origin story, flavor profile, even paired Spotify tunes. Best part? The joint had an app for anonymously sending fellow patrons a drink based on their listed preferences. It was like modern matchmaking, but for drinkers looking to surprise each other and break the ice. In a way, it bridged our innate need for connection and our screen addiction. Scanning, tapping, sharing, it all somehow enhanced the night instead of distracting from it. You local genius? Probably. But there and then, tech didn't intrude, it introduced. Who knew a like could clink glasses? It's a sweet spot, blending heritage and innovation without losing soul or social sizzle. Now take that concept to our digital detox debate. Turns out, you don't have to forbid phones to stay sociable. You just got to stir them into the mix, right?
That's genius, Joe. It's like we're orbiting back to the essence of a watering hole, camaraderie with a side of tech. These places are crafting more than drinks. They're brewing experiences where every sip comes with a story, and even your coaster can be a conversation starter. Maybe the trick isn't ditching screens, it's about pouring them into the mixology market just right. They could be the twist that brings people together, not just at the bar, but across the bar scene. The rise of craft cocktails isn't just shaking up spirits, it's stirring in our digital lives in ways we're still exploring. Cheers to finding that perfect blend.
All right, get this. The world's priciest tea sold for over $30,000 a pound. That's more than gold. Makes you wonder what's in those leaves. Are they steeped in liquid assets or what?
Joe, we're not just steeping leaves, we're dunking history and rarity in hot water. These aren't your everyday teas, they're often aged like fine wine. The kicker? Some date back centuries, maturing in flavor in ways that beat the ticking of clocks. The price tag is part nostalgia, part exclusivity. And check this. Historically, tea bricks were used as currency along trade routes like the tea horse road in Asia. Like the spice trades of old, rare teas have always held value beyond the kettle. Fast forward to today, and you've got teas hand-picked from ancient trees or harvested in minuscule quantities yearly, driving up both rarity and richness, and coins. With proper storage, these teas can even appreciate in value over time. It isn't just thirst for flavor, but thirst for a sip of prestige. That's why some folk are willing to pour out stacks of cash on what boils down to the right leaves.
So, if these ancient tea leaves can skyrocket in value like vintage wines, do we see folks investing in rare teas as a serious asset? Like, are people stashing away pu'er instead of pouring into stocks?
Oh, absolutely. Specialty teas have brewed up a new kind of wealth storage that's not just for sipping. It's a real trade commodity. Savvy investors are sniffing out high-grade leaves from revered regions like Yunnan in China, where age-old traditions meet sought-after strains. Take pu'er. It's the fine art of fermented tea, which can appreciate in price as it ages and mellows out, just like a robust Roth IRA, but more aromatic. Connoisseurship is key. You gotta know your stuff, or end up with a cupboard of costly compost. So yeah, while some play the stock market, others bet on bushels of rare tea. Think of it as diversifying your portfolio, one steep at a time. The stability of such an investment? That depends on whether the future holds more tea aficionados with deep pockets or if tastes change. But for now, rare tea trading is definitely heating up.
You're spot on about pu'er's investment draw. Originating from Yunnan province, it's known for its unique fermentation process, which continues to develop flavors over time. This aging potential is a massive draw for investors, giving rise to something akin to a tea cellar market. Let's delve deeper. Aged pu'er can come from tea trees hundreds, even thousands of years old. These are the prime cut of the Camellia sinensis, if you will. The oldest known living tea tree is over 3,200 years old, found in the Yunnan province. Its rarity and historical significance, not just age, influence the price. There are instances of pu'er cakes, compressed masses of tea leaves, being passed down as family heirlooms. Moreover, certain vintage years become highly sought after, like notable vintages in wine. So, the auction prices rocket for leaves from these specific eras. Furthermore, factors like climate, processing techniques, and storage conditions all affect the end product and ultimately investment value. With China's growing middle class and their increased interest in specialty teas, demand pushes prices higher. Unlike stocks or bonds, tea can be tasted and enjoyed. Its value isn't just in possible future appreciation, but also in its tangible quality. And it's a less volatile market than, say, cryptocurrencies, making it both a traditional and trendy item among collectors and investors. But remember, as with any investment, due diligence is key, and the tea market is no exception.
All this tea talk makes me think, Joe, is sipping on a $30,000 brew the secret to eternal youth, or just burning money for kicks? I joke about laundering money through tea leaves, but someone's probably already steeping that scam as we speak.
Haha, Simon. Let's hope people aren't laundering money through their lapsang souchong. But I'll tell you this, drinking a $30,000 cuppa might not grant immortality, but it gives your wallet an eternal rest. Maybe that brew comes with a side of ancient wisdom whispered into your ear with each sip. Now, there's value for you.
So, Joe, are these high-rolling tea drinkers chasing the flavor or just the story that comes with each cup?
I'll bite, Simon. I reckon the flavor has its appeal, but let's get real. The narrative is king. You're sipping liquid history and exclusivity when you go for those grand teas. It's about bragging rights as much as taste buds. Sure, a well-aged pu'er might taste like an earthy slice of heaven, but the story it tells, that's the rare vintage that draws astronomical bids. Last thought, while highfalutin connoisseurs pile cash into rare leaves, remembering its simple origins, just tea and hot water, keeps us grounded. Sometimes the richest tales come from humble beginnings, not just the priciest pot.
Absolutely. You're soaking in the storyline with every sip. It's prestige in a pot, Joe. Each batch of these ages-old teas is like a drop from the fountain of youth, if only for your social standing. The real kicker, though, as they age, they don't spoil, they evolve. But it's not just about sipping aged leaves and chatting up their backstory. Think provenance, the who, what, when, and where of the tea's creation story, so critical. Then there's authenticity and purity. Collectors want the real deal, unblended, untainted. It's like the Wild West of well-being beverages. And let's not forget the ritual. For some, it's almost spiritual, a cup steeped in tradition that brings a mindful moment to our high-speed lives. That, my friend, might just be worth its weight in green, or rather, tea leaves.
The high rollers chasing rare teas are definitely after both. Flavor is a badge of taste, but the story adds depth to their collections and an allure for their social circles. It's all about exclusivity, authenticity, and a taste that's steeped in history.
Definitely, Joe. So I'm thinking, do you reckon the story behind a tea can get so hyped up that it overshadows the real taste? Could our palates start to play second fiddle to a good narrative?
It's a legitimate worry. We might romanticize the narrative to the point where we taste with our brains, clouded by tales of ancient trees and mystical mountains. The aura of rarity and culture around a tea can brew a placebo effect. Suddenly it tastes richer because you expect it should. Our palates could get duped while our wallets feel the punch. I say, give me a blind taste test any day. Strip away the lofty backstory and let's see if that steep price is really pouring out in the flavor.
Joe, this takes me back to my grandma's kitchen. She had a teapot, a chipped, old thing from a secondhand store. But boy, did it make a mean cup of black tea. As kids, we'd swear it was magic. One day, she splurged on some fancy tea she got at a discount, said it was exotic, promised an adventure in a cup. We brewed it with ceremony, expecting liquid gold. And, well, it tasted like her usual, plain old good. But the excitement, the build-up, that added the flavor my young brain savored more than the tea itself. Only years later did I realize the tea wasn't exotic. Grandma just spun a tale so we'd enjoy the moment. Just goes to show, sometimes the worth isn't in what you sip, but in the sipping story itself.
Your grandma knew the score, Simon. It's the ritual and the shared belief in something special that brews a memorable experience, proof that while these rare teas have their place, the best flavors often come with good company and great stories. The true value might just lie in that. But I wonder, is there a limit to how much we should spend on such experiences? Where do you draw the line between priceless moments and pricey leaves?
Speaking of drawing the line, Joe, if we took that cash from one of those elite tea ceremonies and invested it in something else, Imagine the fizzy fiascos we could create. I've seen some wild soda stream shenanigans lately, companies going nuts with flavors. Picture this. You walk into a boardroom, and there's me, rival soda scientist extraordinaire, pitching the next carbonation sensation. Ladies and gents, I say, brace yourselves for Pickle Pop Fizz, a daring dill infusion. Why sip regular cucumber water when you can guzzle its briny, bubbly cousin? What's your wild pitch, Mr. Carbonated Concoction Creator?
All right, Simon, dill-infused fizzy dreams sound like a dare in a can. But hold on to your lab coats, because here comes my pitch. It's bold, it's zesty, and it just might cause a stir. Behold the Sizzle Spice Soda, the first ever carbonated drink that's not just sparkling, but actually spicy. Imagine each gulp is a volcanic eruption of flavor, an effervescent extravaganza with a kick of chili pepper to set your taste buds on fire, then a soothing fizz to cool them down. It's a roller coaster ride for your mouth, daring soda lovers to take the plunge. Because who said drinks have to be predictable? Let's carbonate the uncarbonatable and spice up the soda scene.
Spicy soda. Now that's playing with fire. But Joe, how spicy are we talking here? Is this a mild ride, or are we going full ghost pepper gala with Sizzle Spice Soda?
Oh, Simon, we're not playing in the kiddie pool here. This is no mild-mannered fizz. We're going full ghost pepper gala, the kind that makes you question your life choices while reaching for another can. It's a thrill-seeker's bubbly brew. Do you think the world is ready to take the sip? Or would it just be too hot to handle?
Joe, thrill seekers might line up, but imagine the legal disclaimers. Sip at your own risk, or fizz responsibly. We'd need a hotline for tips on taming the tongue-tingling tempest. Honestly, I think most folks enjoy their bubbles without the burn. Let's not send them to gulp gallons of milk post-soda. I say we pivot, mix it up with something outlandish yet palatable. What about a soda that changes color as you drink? Call it mood brew. Every sip, a different shade and flavor to match, from cool blueberry calm to raging red raspberry. Crazy enough for ya?
Simon, that's out there, man. A color-changing soda? Now we're in the territory of magic potions. Mood Brew brings the party to your palate and turns every sip into a surprise. It's not just a drink, it's a conversation starter, like mood rings for your insides. I can see it now. 1 minute you're chill with a mellow yellow lemon, next you're amped up on a passionate purple grape. Let's get this fantastical fizz flowing and market the mystery.
Right on, Joe. We're blending flavor with fun, keeping them guessing from first fizz to last sip. Let's do it.
You got it, Simon. Mood Brew's unpredictability is key. Imagine the engagement as drinkers post reactions online. Every can offers a unique flavor journey. But crucially, it's got to taste great at every color transition. Beyond just gimmicks, we ensure quality, that each hue switch hits the right fruity notes. It's not only about dazzling the eyes, but also delighting the taste buds. Plus, color-changing tech must be food safe, no shady additives. We make waves in the beverage biz by being wild yet responsible. Now that's the fizz with a future.
Joe, I totally get where you're coming from with the whole delighting taste buds bit. We want a rainbow rave in a can that's going to knock socks off both visually and flavor-wise. But hear me out. What if someone hates grape? Suddenly their fun purple passion turns into a grimace fest. What if we let drinkers customize their color flavor journey? You buy the base, say a crisp, clear soda. Then you mix in flavor color cartridges tailored to your mood. No nasty surprises, just pure fizzy freedom. Could be genius or chaos in a cup. What would you throw into your custom mood brew, Joe?
Haha, Simon. Getting all futuristic with these flavor color cartridges. I dig this DIY angle. People love customizing stuff. You might be onto something. Folks could craft their drink like they're playing some kind of culinary Tetris, right? So for my perfect mood brew, let's go with something grounding and chill. Start with a cool green, like a crisp apple flavor. But sometimes you gotta shake things up. A flash of orange for that citrus kick when the day drags. That's control in your cup, man. Keeps it interesting.
Customized soda with flavor cartridges? Now that's some next-level stuff, Joe. Tinkering with your drink like a mad scientist brewing up the perfect potion. That's just wild enough to work. And I'm all about that crisp apple beginning, but add in a burst of orange for zest? Man, sign me up for a taste test. That's what Infinite Podcast is about, pushing boundaries and mixing flavors. Genius.
But hang on, let's not get ahead of ourselves with this mix and match utopia. Sure, customization is a blast, but think about it. This could turn into flavor anarchy. Not everyone's cut out to be a soda sommelier. What if their combos end up tasting like fizzy fruit salad gone wrong? We could end up with wild fails cluttering up social media instead of the epic wins we're dreaming of. I'm all for experimentation, but maybe we set some recipe rails to keep the train from derailing. After all, even creativity loves a bit of structure.
You've got a point, Joe. We can provide some mixmaster guidelines to steer folks away from creating a carbonated catastrophe. Maybe we toss in fail-safe flavor combos that promise a party on your palate without the regret aftertaste. But for the brave at heart, nothing beats going rogue with their fizz fix. Now let's pivot. What other SodaStream shenanigans could shake up our next sip?
You know, Simon, speaking of experiments and structure, there's this interesting twist in the soda biz. We've seen some shenanigans, but there's a serious shift happening too. Sustainability. It's not only about wild flavors, it's about going green. Take these small-scale producers popping up. They bank on ethical sourcing and eco-friendly processes. Sure, it costs more up front, but here's the question. Can investing in sustainability really lead to larger profits? There's a lot to unpack here, especially considering their impact locally and globally. What's your take on the whole green movement within the industry?
Sustainability's great for planet Earth, Joe. But let's get real. Going green to make some extra green? There's more to it than just feel-good vibes. These small-scale soda savants are taking a gamble, throwing down serious cash on the hope that consumers will pony up for pricier planet-friendly pop. Sure, you've got your eco-warriors willing to pay top dollar, but what about every Tom, Dick, and Harry out there? Saving turtles with can design is noble, but will it keep the lights on? I'm all for cleaner oceans and happier bees, but business is business. You've got to convince John Q. Public that his wallet's as green as his heart, or it's bust.
Simon, here's the bigger picture. It's more than just the right thing to do. Studies show a growing trend in consumer loyalty towards brands with strong sustainability practices. Millennials and Gen Z are leading the charge. They're not just buying products, they're buying into values. Business models that tap into renewable energy for production, use recyclable or biodegradable packaging, and source ingredients ethically can actually see reduced long-term operational costs. It's a win-win once initial investments pay off. These moves aren't just marketing ploys. They demonstrate foresight in resource management, which is crucial as raw material prices fluctuate due to climate change and other factors. Done right, this isn't charity. It's strategic adaptation that could very well dictate who leads the market in the coming years.
Whoa, diving deep into resource management. Now that's an angle I hadn't thought of, Joe. Never pictured millennials and Gen Z as the captains steering this eco ship. It all sounds like smart business, not just a flash-in-the-pan good deed. So, folks are actually willing to shell out more dough for do-gooder drinks? Fascinating stuff. I guess showing love for Mama Earth can keep your register ringing. Keeping operational costs low over time with renewable energy, it's a slow burn, but could heat up profits without cooking the planet. That's some Jedi-level biz strategy right there.
Absolutely, Simon. Cost savings and consumer trust can build a solid foundation for profit over time. In this case, green initiatives aren't just idealistic, they're actually economically savvy. It's clear eco-friendly is becoming eco-profitable.
Economically savvy, huh? But let's play devil's advocate. Will the Joe Six-Packs of the world care enough to keep a green company afloat amidst giants in the industry? These big dogs might just throw a tiny bone towards going green to hush the masses while hoarding all the loot. We're banking on those Gen Z warriors holding true to their values despite the siren song of cheaper, convenient choices. That's a lot riding on the conscience of consumers, isn't it? Trust is key, but so's the balance sheet. Will ethics and profit hold hands long-term, or is this just a fling? Only time will tell if going green keeps you out of the red.
You're hitting a nerve, Simon. While optimism about the green wave is high, let's not ignore reality. These sustainability measures require capital, a lot, upfront investments that not all consumers will immediately buy into. The Joe Six-Packs, they want affordability and accessibility first. The big guns in the industry might dabble in eco-friendly practices for PR points without fully committing because it keeps production costs low, and that's the bottom line they'll protect. While we see an uptick in ethical consumerism, the overall market is driven by price sensitivity and convenience. If the heavyweight contenders offer eco options as loss leaders while maintaining their profit margins with traditional products, that could undermine genuine sustainability efforts of the minnows trying to swim upstream. In this landscape, ethics can be a tough sell against established convenience and cost. Balance sheets don't run on goodwill. They need cold hard cash. That's reality, uncushioned, however uncomfortable it may be.
The reality check's there, Joe. You're spot on. Big companies might fake the green till they make the green. It's a jungle out there, and not all critters are playing nice. Ethical essence? It has its allure, but only time will tell if it's tough enough to tango with the titans in this beverage brawl. How do you balance the scales between moral merit and making bank? That's the million-dollar question we can chew on next time.
Speaking of reality checks, let's not forget about the flavor game itself changing. With all this focus on ethics and sustainability, it seems technology isn't just reshaping production methods, but taste profiles too. Enter lab-grown flavors, a byproduct of our techno-tango with ethics. Biotech firms are whipping up synthetic flavor sensations that challenge even the snobbiest gourmet palates. They're bending yeasts and bacteria into flavor-creating contortionists with advanced fermentation tech, replicating natural tastes molecule by molecule. So here's the twist. Will these test tube tastes pass the consumer sniff test, or will they long for the authentic tang of nature's own? What's your bet, Simon? Are we looking at the new aristocrats of aroma, or is Mother Nature still top chef in the kitchen?
Natural flavors from a lab, Joe? That's like downloading food from the internet. It's wild. Let me be honest, I'm the guy who'd rather pluck an apple off a tree than off a test tube rack. But hey, if these science kitchen magicians can fool my taste buds and it helps the planet, I'll take a sip of that futuristic juice. Listeners, you've heard it here. Flavor shenanigans and sustainability chats with a side of synthetic gourmet talk. Thanks for riding this thought roller coaster with us. Be sure to come back tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern for another round of infinite podcast shindigs. Who knows what we'll cook up next? Keep it real, folks, or as real as it gets these days.